The rain fell in a cold, relentless sheet, turning the manicured lawn of the sprawling suburban home into a dark, glistening marsh. It was a merciless November downpour, the kind that chills the bone and seems to wash all the color from the world. Against the grand, double-oak doors of the house, a small, older woman stood, her thin coat already soaked through, her gray hair plastered to her scalp. This was Eleanor. Her shoulders were slumped, not in defeat, but in a kind of weary resignation, as if she had seen this moment coming from a great distance and had simply arrived at her unfortunate destination. Inside, bathed in the warm, golden light of a crystal chandelier, stood Chloe, her wife. Chloe's face, usually a carefully composed mask of pleasant, aristocratic indifference, was twisted into a sneer of pure contempt. Her hand was still on the doorknob, having just propelled her mother-in-law out into the storm. "And stay out," Chloe's voice was sharp, a shard of glass in the comfortable silence of the house. "I will not have my home, my life, cluttered with your drabness. Liam may be blind to it, but I am not. This is my world now, and you have no place in it." Eleanor said nothing. She simply looked back at the woman her son had married, her expression unreadable in the deepening twilight. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and began the long, slow walk down the winding stone driveway, each step a quiet surrender. The rain hammered down, obscuring her small figure until she was just a ghost, a memory fading into the deluge. Chloe watched her go, a grim smile of satisfaction touching her lips. She closed the door, the heavy oak thudding with a sound of absolute finality. She smoothed down her silk blouse, took a deep, cleansing breath, and felt a surge of triumph. She had finally excised the last, lingering piece of Liam's humble, embarrassing past. The house felt purer, cleaner, solely hers. She believed she had cast out a piece of undesirable history, a relic that threatened the pristine image she had so carefully constructed. She had no idea she had just evicted the silent architect of her entire world. Within 2 hours, a simple ringing of a doorbell would not just shatter her illusions, it would detonate the very foundations of her life. Has someone ever underestimated you so completely, so devastatingly? It's a feeling that sinks deep, isn't it? We'd love to hear from you in the comments, and please, let us know where in the world you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now let's get back to that house, to that cold November evening, and watch as the truth begins its slow, inexorable march toward the light. An hour later, Liam Sterling turned his car into the driveway, the headlights cutting through the still falling rain. He was an architect, a man who thought in lines and structures, in foundations and load-bearing walls. His own demeanor was much the same, calm, solid, and built to withstand pressure. He was handsome in a quiet, unassuming way that Chloe had once called a blank canvas, a comment that had stung more than he let on. Tonight, a familiar weariness settled over him as he saw the house. It was a magnificent structure, a testament to modern design with its sweeping glass walls and clean, bold angles. It was also a house he had come to resent. It was Chloe's trophy, a monument to her ambition, and it felt less like a home and more like a beautifully designed cage. He parked the car in the 3-car garage next to Chloe's gleaming white sports car. He noticed his mother's modest sedan was gone. He'd hoped she would stay the week, a rare visit she had been hesitant to make. He knew why. He felt a familiar knot of guilt and frustration tighten in his stomach. Inside, the house was silent, save for the drumming of rain against the vast panes of glass. Chloe was in the living room, curled on a white leather sofa, a glass of wine in her hand, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as he entered, her smile bright and entirely artificial. "Darling, you're home," she said, her tone light, airy. "Vicious weather, isn't it?" Liam took off his damp coat. "Where's Mom?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Chloe waved a dismissive hand, her eyes still on her phone. "Oh, she left. A bit of a fuss, but it's for the best. Her presence was becoming stressful." Liam stood perfectly still. The knot in his stomach turned to ice. "She left? In this storm? Her car is gone. Did you call her a taxi?" "Don't be silly, Liam," Chloe sighed, finally looking at him with an expression of strained patience. "She has her own car. She's a grown woman. I'm sure she's fine." "What happened, Chloe?" Liam's voice was lower now, each word deliberate. He could feel the pressure building behind his calm facade, the tectonic plates of his patience beginning to shift. "We had a disagreement," she said, taking a delicate sip of wine. "She was criticizing the way I run my house, my life. She was judging me, Liam, in my own home. I simply told her that if she was so unhappy with my standards, she was free to leave." "You told her to leave," Liam repeated, the words tasting like ash. "In the middle of a storm." "I suggested it was for the best," Chloe corrected, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "She was bringing such a negative energy into the space. We have the big donors party on Saturday, and I need everything to be perfect. You know how important this is for Daddy's new venture. We can't have your gloomy mother hovering in the corner like a bad omen." Liam didn't respond. He turned and walked back to the front door, his movements stiff. He opened it and looked out into the black, rain-swept night. There, on the stone porch, caught in a puddle near the steps, was a small, sodden piece of fabric. It was his mother's scarf, a simple, hand-knitted thing in a soft blue color he'd known since he was a boy. He bent down and picked it up, the wet wool cold against his skin. He squeezed it, and a stream of cold rainwater ran down his wrist. He closed his eyes for a moment. He pictured his mother, Eleanor, walking down that long driveway, the wind and rain lashing at her. A woman who had faced down creditors, illnesses, and the profound loneliness of widowhood with unshakable dignity, now cast out of her own son's home like a beggar. And for what? For threatening an image, for not fitting into a world of superficial gloss and brittle egos. When he turned back into the house, his face was a mask of placid control, but his eyes held a new light, a hard, cold clarity. The architect in him saw the flaw in the structure of his life, a foundational crack that had been papered over with hope and denial for too long. Tonight that crack had splintered, running straight through the heart of his marriage. Structures with such deep, integral failures could not be repaired. They had to be demolished. Chloe, sipping her wine in her beautiful, sterile living room, saw only her quiet, compliant husband. She did not see the man who was now, with methodical precision, planning the demolition. Their beginning had been a whirlwind, a collision of two different worlds that felt, at first, like a thrilling new chemistry. Liam Sterling was a rising star at a boutique architectural firm known for his innovative designs and a work ethic that bordered on monastic. He was quiet, thoughtful, and carried an air of self-containment that people often mistook for shyness. Chloe Davenport was the daughter of Richard Davenport, a real estate mogul whose name was plastered on half the commercial buildings in the city. She worked in PR, a vague title that seemed to mostly involve attending galas, managing her social media presence, and curating her family's public image. They met at a charity auction where one of Liam's conceptual sketches was being sold. Chloe, tasked with acquiring a cultured piece for her father's office, outbid everyone with a casual flick of her wrist. She'd approached him afterward, her smile dazzling, her confidence a force of nature. "You're the artist?" she'd asked, her eyes appraising him with the same cool assessment she'd given the sketch. "It's a lovely little drawing, very earnest." Liam, unaccustomed to such directness, had been both intimidated and fascinated. Chloe was like one of the buildings he admired, sleek, bold, and unapologetically modern. She pursued him with a single-minded intensity that he, in his quiet focus, found both flattering and overwhelming. She loved his potential, she said. She saw something in him, a raw talent that she could help shape and polish. He was her project. At the time, blinded by the dizzying glamour of her world, he had interpreted this as love. The first red flags were small, fluttering things he'd easily dismissed. There was the first time she met his mother, Eleanor. Liam had brought Chloe to his mother's small, tidy home, a modest house filled with books and the smell of baking bread. Eleanor, a retired librarian with a keen intellect and a gentle spirit, had welcomed Chloe with genuine warmth. Chloe had been polite, but with a palpable sense of condescension. She'd surveyed the comfortable, slightly worn furniture with a faint, tight smile. "How charming," she'd murmured, running a finger over a hand-carved bookshelf, her tone suggesting the exact opposite. "It's all so authentic." Later in the car, she'd squeezed Liam's hand. "Your mother is very sweet, darling, a simple soul. It's a good thing you had the ambition to get out of all that. I can't imagine you being happy in such a limited environment." Liam had felt a prickle of defensiveness, but Chloe had kissed him, telling him how proud she was of him, and the moment had passed. He told himself she was just from a different world. She didn't understand the richness of a life not measured in square footage or brand names. He would teach her. He would be the bridge between his world of quiet integrity and her world of glittering surfaces. The wedding was a grand affair, orchestrated entirely by Chloe and her mother Beatrice. It was less a celebration of a union and more a strategic social event. Eleanor had attended wearing a simple but elegant dress she'd sewn herself. Beatrice, a woman who seemed permanently embalmed in judgment, had eyed the dress with disdain. "Did you make that yourself?" she'd asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How wonderfully resourceful." Throughout the reception, Liam watched as Chloe and her parents, Richard and Beatrice, operated as a seamless unit of aristocratic superiority. They moved through the crowd, their laughter a little too loud, their compliments always carrying a subtle barb for those they deemed beneath them. Richard Davenport, a man with a booming voice and the aggressive confidence of someone who had never been told no, had clapped Liam on the back. "Welcome to the family, son," he'd boomed, loud enough for several guests to hear. "Chloe's got a good eye. She saw the raw material in you. We'll make something of you yet." Again, Liam had swallowed the insult, coating it with the hope of his new marriage. He loved Chloe, or at least he loved the woman he believed she could be, the woman he saw in fleeting moments of vulnerability. He told himself this was just their way, a kind of social armor. After the wedding, Chloe insisted they build a new house. A statement piece, she'd called it, something that reflects who we are now. Liam, using his own designs, had overseen the project. It was his work, his vision. But Chloe spoke of it as our house, with the unspoken assumption that her family's wealth had made it possible. Liam never corrected her. He had his reasons for allowing her this assumption, a quiet, long-term strategy he had hoped he would never have to deploy. The house became the stage for Chloe's life, and Liam was a supporting actor. His mother's visits grew less frequent. Eleanor was not a woman who complained, but Liam could see the hurt in her eyes each time Chloe made a casual, cutting remark. "Oh, Eleanor, that old recipe? No one eats casseroles anymore. That sweater is lovely, but the color does wash you out so." They were small, seemingly insignificant digs, the death by 1,000 cuts that slowly and deliberately established a pecking order. Eleanor was at the bottom. Liam was the tolerated middle. Chloe and her family were at the glittering, unassailable top. Now, standing in the cold hall, clutching his mother's wet scarf, Liam saw the complete, unvarnished blueprint of his marriage. It was not a bridge between two worlds. It was a hostile takeover. Chloe had not wanted to understand his world. She had wanted to obliterate it. And he, the patient architect, had let her. He had reinforced her delusions of grandeur with his silence, waiting for the love he believed in to emerge. But it never had. There was no hidden depth, No kinder woman beneath the surface. The surface was all there was. The structure was rotten to its core, and as he stood there, the plan for its demolition began to form, clear and precise, in his mind. The day after the storm was unnervingly bright. A pale, watery sun shone on a world scrubbed clean, the light glinting off the still damp leaves in the pristine glass of the house. Inside, the silence was a tangible thing, thick and heavy with unspoken words. Liam had slept in one of the guest rooms. He'd risen early, dressed in a sharp, dark suit, and was sitting at the vast marble island in the kitchen when Chloe came downstairs. She was dressed in expensive athleisure wear, her hair in a perfect ponytail, ready for her mid-morning Pilates class. She seemed to have decided to treat the previous night's events as a minor inconvenience that was already in the past. "Good morning, darling," she chirped, pouring herself a glass of filtered water with lemon. She studiously avoided his eyes. "I have such a busy day. I have a final consultation with the caterer for Saturday, and the florist is a complete disaster. You would not believe the trouble I'm having getting the right shade of cream rose." Liam watched her, his expression unmoving. He took a slow sip of his black coffee. "I spoke to my mother this morning," he said, his voice flat. Chloe paused, her hand holding the water glass halfway to her lips. "Oh, is she all right? I told you she would be." "She made it to a hotel," Liam continued, ignoring her question. "She was cold and she was frightened, but she's safe." "Well, good," Chloe said, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. "Then it's all settled. Now about the party, I need you to be on your best behavior. Daddy is bringing Marcus Thorne." Marcus Thorne. The name hung in the air. Thorne was a legendary investor, a kingmaker whose backing could turn her father's new real estate venture from a risky gamble into a guaranteed empire. "Your father's best behavior, you mean?" Liam asked, his voice still dangerously quiet. Chloe finally looked at him, her eyes narrowing. "What is that supposed to mean?" "Liam, I don't have time for one of your moods. This party is critical. It's about securing our future. Our image has to be flawless. We can't have any distractions." "My mother is a distraction?" "Yes," she snapped, her composure finally cracking. "Her sad little stories, her drab clothes, her judgment. It's all a distraction from who we are, from what we're building. You should be grateful that I'm willing to put in the effort to elevate us. For God's sake, Liam, think of our image." Liam said nothing. He simply stared at her, and in his silence Chloe saw only stubbornness, not the profound and final judgment he was passing on her. She let out an exasperated sigh. "I have to go, or I'll be late. We'll talk about this later. Just try to be pleasant, for me." She grabbed her keys and swept out of the room, leaving a trail of expensive perfume in her wake. Liam remained at the island for a long time after she left. The sun climbed higher, filling the cavernous kitchen with a cold, sterile light. He thought of the word elevate. Chloe and her family believed they had elevated him, lifted him from his humble origins into their rarefied air. They had it all backward. They were the ones living in a precarious structure, a house of cards built on arrogance and a single source of wealth. He and his mother had built their lives on a foundation of solid rock. He finished his coffee, rinsed the cup, and placed it carefully in the dishwasher. Then he walked to his home office. It was the one room in the house that felt like his, a space Chloe had dismissed as boring and left to his own devices. It was minimalist, functional, with clean lines and surfaces. On his large oak desk, next to a sleek computer monitor, sat a worn, dark leather portfolio. It was old, the corners softened with age, the surface bearing the faint scratches and scuffs of a long and useful life. It had been his grandfather's, then his mother's, and now it was his. He pulled the portfolio toward him, his fingers tracing the familiar texture of the leather. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He knew its contents by heart. They were the blueprints of his real life, the deeds and trusts and incorporation papers that told a story so completely at odds with the one Chloe had written for him. He had kept this portfolio, this truth, hidden for years. He'd done it out of love, or what he'd mistaken for love, hoping to build a marriage based on who he was, not what he had. He had wanted Chloe to love Liam, the man, not Liam Sterling, the silent partner of a financial powerhouse. He had given her every chance. He had absorbed the insults, endured the condescension, and allowed her to believe her world was the only one that mattered. He had built a beautiful house around a flawed person, hoping the structure itself might inspire her to be better. But it hadn't. It had only made her worse. He rested his hand on the portfolio, the cool leather a comfort. It felt like a weapon now, but a weapon he would wield with surgical precision, not with rage. This wasn't about revenge. It was about correction. It was about restoring a balance that had been thrown violently out of alignment. Chloe was worried about the image for her party. By Saturday night, he thought, with a chilling sense of calm, she would finally have a perfectly clear one. The days leading up to the party were a masterclass in strategic calm on Liam's part and oblivious arrogance on Chloe's. She was a whirlwind of frantic energy, a general marshaling her troops for a decisive battle. Her phone was permanently attached to her ear as she debated canapé options with the caterer, argued about lighting schemes with the event planner, and coordinated outfits with her mother. The house was a flurry of activity, with florists, cleaners, and technicians coming and going in a steady stream. Through it all, Liam moved like a phantom. He was quiet, polite, and completely detached. He went to his office each morning and returned each evening, his expression placid and unreadable. Chloe, consumed by her own anxieties, interpreted his silence as submission. She believed he was sulking, but that he had ultimately understood the importance of the party and would fall in line, as he always did. She was so focused on the superficial perfection of the event that she failed to notice the profound structural shift in the man she lived with. On Wednesday, Liam made his first call. He sat in his quiet office, the door closed, the leather portfolio open on his desk for the first time. He dialed a number from memory. Eleanor Vance's phone, a familiar, calm voice answered. "Hi, Mom," Liam said, a warmth entering his voice that had been absent for days. "Liam, my dear, are you all right?" Eleanor's concern was immediate, palpable even through the phone line. "I'm fine, Mom, more than fine, I'm just decided." He paused. "How are you, really?" "The hotel is comfortable," she said, her voice practical as always. "And Mr. Harrison has been wonderfully attentive, but that's not what you're asking. I am sad, Liam, not for me, for you, for the love you thought you had." Liam closed his eyes. "I know, but I was wrong. I built on a faulty foundation. It's time to clear the site." It was their language, the language of builders. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, "Are you sure, son? This will be explosive. There is no going back from it." "I'm sure," Liam said, his voice firm with a resolve that had been forged in the cold rain of his mother's eviction. "It's time. The disrespect has to have a consequence. Not just for us, for them. They need to see." "All right then," Eleanor said, her voice now filled with the same steely resolve as his. "I trust your judgment. Always have. What do you need from me?" "Just be ready for Saturday," Liam said. "Mr. Harrison knows the plan." His second call was to Mr. Harrison, a man whose family had been legal counsel to Eleanor's for generations. He was old school, impeccably discreet, and possessed a mind like a steel trap. "Liam," Harrison's voice was dry and professional. "I assume the time has come." "It has, Robert," Liam confirmed. "Saturday night, around 9. I'll text you the address, though I believe you have it in the file. File 7B, the Davenport Project," Harrison said with a hint of dry humor. "Everything has been in order for over a year, Liam. The trust documents are ironclad. The corporate ownership of the assets is indisputable. It will be a short, and for them, a very painful conversation. That's the point, Liam said. Thank you, Robert. It is my pleasure, Liam. Your mother is a remarkable woman. I have been looking forward to reminding certain people of that fact. Meanwhile, Chloe was on the phone with her mother, Beatrice, complaining from the walk-in closet where she was trying to choose a dress. He's just so moody, Mother, she lamented. He walks around like a thundercloud. You'd think I'd asked him to do something truly awful, not just maintain a standard of living. He doesn't appreciate what I do for us. Of course he doesn't, darling, Beatrice's voice soothed from the other end. People like Liam don't understand the pressure we're under. They come from a world where ambition is a dirty word. You just focus on Saturday. Your father is counting on you to charm Marcus Thorne. Once this deal is done, our family will be on another level entirely. Liam will have to be grateful then. He'll see the wisdom in it all. Chloe hung up, mollified. Her mother was right. Liam was just being difficult. He couldn't see the big picture. He was an artist, after all, prone to emotion and sentimentality. It was up to her, the pragmatist, the visionary, to steer their ship toward the glittering shores of success. She selected a stunning, backless gown of silver silk. It was a dress designed to be looked at, a dress that screamed wealth and confidence. It was the perfect armor for the battle she thought she was fighting. On Friday evening, Liam came home to find Chloe in a state of high excitement. "It's all perfect," she exclaimed, gesturing around the immaculate living room, where dozens of cream roses now stood in tall crystal vases. "The caterer, the staff, the playlist, everything is set. Tomorrow will be a triumph." She finally seemed to notice him, and she walked over, placing her hands on his chest. "Liam, can we please be a team tomorrow? Can you just be proud of me? Of us?" Liam looked down at her. He saw the genuine excitement in her eyes, the desperate need for validation. For a fleeting second, he felt a pang of something akin to pity. She was so completely, utterly blind. She was celebrating on the deck of a ship he was about to scuttle. "I will be exactly what the situation requires me to be," he said, his voice soft. Chloe took this as an agreement. She smiled, relieved. "Thank you. It's going to be a night no one will ever forget." Liam met her gaze. "You're right about that," he said. "I can guarantee it." Saturday night arrived on a wave of crisp, cold air. The house, which had felt so sterile and vast, was now transformed. The lighting was low and intimate, casting a golden glow that made the crystal and silver sparkle. Music, a tasteful blend of ambient jazz, drifted from hidden speakers. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the cream roses Chloe had fought so hard for. Well-dressed guests drifted through the open-plan living space, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings. It was the picture of effortless elegance, a perfectly executed illusion. Chloe was the radiant center of it all. In her silver silk gown, she moved through the crowd with the grace of a dancer, her smile dazzling, her hand touching an arm here, her head tilting to laugh at a joke there. She was in her element, the queen of a court she had built and curated. Her parents, Richard and Beatrice, were nearby, holding court of their own. Richard, florid and booming, was pontificating to a circle of men in expensive suits. Beatrice, draped in diamonds, was engaged in a quiet, cutting dissection of another guest's outfit with a pair of equally sharp-faced women. Liam stood near the edge of the room, by the vast window overlooking the darkened garden. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, a stark and simple contrast to the glitter around him. He held a glass of sparkling water, observing. He was a spectator at his own execution, or so everyone thought. He felt a strange calm, the quiet focus of an architect reviewing the final plans before the demolition begins. He had walked through the house earlier, noting the exits, the sight lines, the acoustics of the main room. Everything was in place. He caught Chloe's eye across the room. She gave him a brief, tight smile, a silent command to mingle, to perform. He gave a slight nod and began to drift through the crowd, a ghost in his own home. He exchanged pleasantries, his responses polite and brief. He was a master of the non-committal smile, the vague nod. Most people's eyes slid right past him, seeking more important connections. He was merely Chloe Davenport's quiet, handsome husband, an accessory. Around 8:30, Marcus Thorne arrived. He was an older man, small and unassuming in a way that seemed to amplify his immense power. The energy in the room shifted, a magnetic pull toward him. Richard Davenport immediately detached from his group and swooped in, his face beaming with a predatory warmth. "Marcus, so glad you could make it," he boomed, clapping Thorne on the shoulder a little too hard. Chloe was there a second later, her smile at its most brilliant. "Mr. Thorne, it's an honor to have you in our home." Liam watched the performance from a distance. He saw Thorne's polite but reserved smile, the slight stiffness in his posture as Richard launched into a loud, boastful story. Liam had met Thorne once before, at a city planning gala. The man was sharp, observant, and hated sycophants. Richard's approach was all wrong. Later, as Liam was refilling his water, Richard cornered him near the bar, with Marcus Thorne in tow. "Marcus, I want you to meet my son-in-law, Liam," Richard announced, draping a heavy arm over Liam's shoulders. "He's the one who designed this place, good with his hands. Of course, he married up, didn't you, son?" Richard winked at Thorne, a conspiratorial man-to-man gesture. "My Chloe, she has a habit of picking up strays and polishing them up." Several people nearby chuckled. Chloe, who had joined them, laughed along, a high, tinkling sound. "Oh, Daddy, don't be mean," she said, but her eyes were dancing with amusement. The public humiliation was complete. It was the final, careless insult, delivered in front of the one man they were all desperate to impress. Liam felt the eyes of the group on him, waiting for his reaction. He felt the familiar sting, the hot flush of anger, but he pushed it down, deep down. The demolition was minutes away. He looked at Richard, at Chloe, and offered a small, faint smile. It was a chillingly empty expression. "Richard is a great kidder," Liam said, his voice even. He looked directly at Marcus Thorne. "It's good to see you again, Mr. Thorne." Thorne's eyebrows raised a fraction. He remembered him. "Mr. Sterling, yes, the gala. You had some interesting thoughts on the waterfront redevelopment." Before Liam could respond, Richard cut in, steering Thorne away. "Let me show you the terrace, Marcus. The view is spectacular." Liam watched them go. He glanced at his watch. It was 8:57 p.m. He took a slow, deliberate breath. In the quiet of his study, the leather portfolio sat on the desk. He didn't need to touch it. He could feel its weight from across the house. The quiet before the storm was over. The first tremor was about to hit. The chime of the doorbell at precisely 9 o'clock cut through the ambient jazz and chatter like a judge's gavel. It was an unexpected, formal sound in the midst of the party's carefully curated casualness. A few heads turned toward the grand entrance hall. Chloe, who was in the middle of a story, frowned with annoyance. A late arrival was a breach of etiquette. It disrupted the flow. "Who on earth could that be?" she muttered to her mother. She caught the eye of a passing catering staffer. "See who's at the door, will you?" she commanded, her tone sharp. The young man, dressed in a crisp black uniform, hurried to the entrance. The heavy oak door swung open, revealing the dark, cold night beyond. From the living room, the guest could only see the staffer's back as he spoke to the unseen visitors. His posture, at first relaxed, suddenly stiffened. He took a half-step back. After a moment of tense silence, he turned, his face pale and flustered. He scurried back to Chloe, his professional composure gone. "Ma'am," he stammered, his voice a low whisper, "there are some people at the door, a woman and two gentlemen. They say they have an appointment with Mr. Sterling." Chloe's eyes narrowed. "An appointment? During her party, the audacity was breathtaking. She imagined some desperate contractor or a pushy salesman Liam had forgotten to handle. The timing was an embarrassment. "An appointment?" she hissed, her voice low and furious. "How dare he?" "Excuse me," she said to her group, her smile a brittle veneer over her rage. "I have to deal with a little domestic matter." She strode toward the entrance hall, her silver dress shimmering, her heels clicking angrily on the polished marble floor. She was preparing a scathing dismissal, a verbal lashing that would send these intruders scurrying back into the night. She would make an example of them. She reached the open doorway and stopped dead. Standing on the threshold, illuminated by the warm light from the hall, was not some hapless salesman. It was Eleanor. But it was an Eleanor she had never seen before. Gone was the drab little woman in hand-knitted sweaters. In her place stood a figure of immense and quiet power. She wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, the kind that speaks of boardrooms and serious money. Her silver hair was elegantly styled, and her eyes, the same clear gray as her son's, held a calm, unshakable authority. There was no trace of the woman who had stood shivering in the rain on this very spot just a few nights ago. Beside her stood two men. One was older, with a sharp, intelligent face, and wearing a conservative but clearly expensive suit. This was Robert Harrison, the lawyer. The other man was younger, handsome, with an air of dynamic energy. This was David Chen, Liam's business partner. Both men looked past Chloe as if she were a minor obstruction, their attention focused somewhere beyond her. Chloe stared, momentarily speechless. The transformation was so absolute, so jarring, that her mind struggled to process it. She saw the expensive clothes, the confident posture, but she still saw the woman she had thrown out. The cognitive dissonance was dizzying. "Eleanor?" The name came out as a shocked whisper. Then her anger returned, a defense mechanism against her confusion. "What is the meaning of this? You can't be here. This is a private party." Eleanor's voice, when she spoke, was not the gentle, hesitant tone Chloe was used to. It was calm, clear, and resonant, carrying an authority that made the caterer flinch, and a nearby guest stop their conversation to listen. "I believe you know the meaning of this, Chloe," Eleanor said, her gaze steady and direct. It was not a gaze of anger, but of profound, unchangeable fact. "We are not here for the party. We are here to discuss the ownership of this property. And we have an appointment." Just then, a figure detached from the crowd in the living room and walked toward them. It was Liam. He moved with a newfound purpose, his quietness no longer passive but predatory. The guests, sensing a drama far more compelling than small talk, fell silent. The music seemed to fade into the background. Every eye in the room was now fixed on the tableau at the door. Liam came to a stop beside his mother, forming a united front. He looked past his stunned wife and at her father Richard, who was now approaching, his face a mask of bewildered fury. "Liam! What the hell is this?" Richard boomed. "Get your mother and her associates out of my daughter's house this instant." Liam's response was quiet, yet it carried through the cavernous, silent room with perfect clarity. "That's the first point of discussion, Richard," he said, his eyes locking with his father-in-law's. "It's not her house." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that fell over the entire party. The guests stood like statues, glasses frozen halfway to their lips. Chloe's perfectly constructed world, her glittering party, her entire identity, had just been fractured by a single, impossible sentence. She stared at Liam, at the stranger he had suddenly become, and for the first time she felt a sliver of pure, cold fear. The man she thought was a blank canvas had just revealed a portrait of a king, and she was merely a detail in the background. The demolition had begun. The chess match had commenced, and Chloe and her family had just realized they were not even players. They were pieces being moved. Liam stood beside Eleanor, a silent, solid presence. All the years of quiet observation, of enduring slights and storing them away, had culminated in this single, crystalline moment of confrontation. Richard Davenport, red-faced and sputtering, took a step forward. "What nonsense is this? Of course it's her house. My daughter's house. I helped finance this place myself," he blustered, trying to regain control through sheer volume. "Did you?" Liam's question was soft, almost curious. He turned his gaze from Richard to the crowd, then let it settle on Chloe, who was staring at him, her mouth slightly agape, the color draining from her face. "That's not what the financial records show." He looked at Chloe, and his voice, though still quiet, was now infused with an icy precision. He began to speak, and every word was a carefully placed stone in the wall he was building between them. This was the list of grievances, the accounting of 1,000 small cruelties. "For 4 years I have listened," he began. "I listened when you called my mother's home quaint and limited. I listened when your mother mocked the dress she made for our wedding. I listened when your father joked about polishing up the stray he'd allowed into the family." With each sentence, a memory flared in the minds of those present. Beatrice flinched. Richard's blustering seemed to deflate. Chloe looked as though she had been struck. "I listened when you told me my work was just earnest little drawings, until you decided it could be used to build this monument to your ego," Liam continued, his eyes never leaving Chloe's. "I listened to you complain about my mother's negative energy. I listened as you described her as a bad omen. And 3 nights ago, I came home to find the scarf she knitted for me as a child, soaking wet in a puddle on the porch of the house you threw her out of." He paused, letting the weight of that final image settle into the silent room. "You judged a woman you know nothing about," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "You dismissed her. You humiliated her. And in doing so, you humiliated me. You thought her worth, my worth, could be measured by the labels on our clothes or the simplicity of our manners." He gestured toward his business partner, David Chen. "This is David Chen, my partner. Together we run an architectural and development firm. Not a small boutique firm, Chloe, a firm that has quietly acquired and developed over $1 billion in property across North America and Europe over the last decade." A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Marcus Thorne, the investor, looked from Liam to Richard with a new, sharp interest. Richard's face had gone from red to a pasty, mottled white. Liam then turned and placed a hand on his mother's shoulder. "You were so worried about status and powerful names. You should have asked for one. The firm is called Sterling and Vance." He let the name hang in the air. Vance. To Chloe, it meant nothing. But to Richard Davenport, a man who had spent his life in real estate, the name was a thunderclap. He staggered back a step, his eyes wide with horror. Eleanor Vance wasn't just a name, she was a legend. A brilliant, reclusive architectural genius who had designed some of the most iconic buildings of the last century before disappearing from public life 2 decades ago to raise her son. Her work was studied in universities. Her name was whispered with a kind of religious reverence by developers. She was not just wealthy, she was foundational. To have insulted Eleanor Vance was not just a social gaffe, it was professional suicide. "Vance?" Richard croaked, the sound barely audible. Liam nodded slowly. "My mother, Eleanor Vance, the founder, the lead designer for its first 15 years, and still the majority shareholder of the entire Sterling and Vance enterprise." He looked back at Chloe, whose entire body was trembling. The beautiful silver dress now seemed like a hollow shell. "You didn't throw out a poor old woman, Chloe. You threw out the queen, and you did it in her own castle." The quiet bomb had detonated, and the shockwave was still expanding, tearing through the fabric of the room. Chloe's world had not just been fractured, it had been vaporized. The house, the dress, the guests, her family's reputation, All of it was built on a foundation owned by the very woman she had cast into the rain. The irony was so total, so devastating, that it was almost sublime. The immediate aftermath was a cascade of social and personal ruin. The party, which had been frozen in a state of suspended animation, shattered into 100 quiet, frantic pieces. Guests who had been fawning over Richard and Chloe moments before now avoided their eyes, murmuring excuses as they began to discreetly slip away. They moved with the furtive urgency of rats deserting a sinking ship, desperate to distance themselves from the catastrophic collapse of the Davenport dynasty. The air was thick with whispers, with the frantic tapping of messages being sent to spread the news. Richard Davenport looked like a man who had suffered a physical blow. His face was slack, his eyes vacant with the terrifying realization of his own professional mortality. He looked at Eleanor, not as his son's mother, but as the ghost of his career's future. He knew the story would be all over the city by morning. Marcus Thorne, the kingmaker, was watching him with an expression of cold pity. Thorne would never invest with him now. No one would. He was a pariah. Chloe, however, was still trapped in the vortex of the explosion. Disbelief warred with dawning horror on her face. She turned from Liam's resolute expression to her father's crumbling one, seeking an escape, a denial. "Daddy?" she pleaded, her voice a thin, reedy sound. "What is he talking about? This is a lie. It's a trick. Tell them." But Richard couldn't speak. He just shook his head slowly, a gesture of utter defeat. It was Robert Harrison, the lawyer, who delivered the final, clinical blow. He stepped forward into the space between the families, opening the worn leather portfolio. The rustle of paper was unnervingly loud in the silent room. "The legalities are quite straightforward," he announced, his voice dry and devoid of emotion. He held up a thick document. "The deed for this property at 417 Willow Creek Lane is held in a blind trust, established in 2008. The sole trustee and beneficiary of that trust is Ms. Eleanor Vance." He produced another set of papers. The furnishings, art, and vehicles, including the white sports car registered to Ms. Chloe Davenport, were purchased through a corporate account belonging to Sterling and Vance Properties. They are and have always been company assets. He looked directly at Chloe. "Technically, you have been living here as a guest with certain privileges, which have now been revoked." The word guest struck Chloe with the force of a physical slap. It was the same casual, demeaning status she had so often assigned to others. Liam then stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Chloe and her parents. He was holding up the moral mirror, forcing them to look at the ugliness they had created. "This was never about money," he said, his voice resonating with a sorrowful clarity. "This was about respect, a respect you demand from others but refuse to give. You judged my mother by her simple coat, not by the strength of her character. You measured me by a job you thought was beneath you, not by the integrity of my work. You built your entire world on a foundation of sand, on money you didn't earn and a status you didn't deserve." He finally looked at Chloe, and for the first time, a flicker of the man who had once loved her showed in his eyes. A deep, profound sadness. "I truly loved you, Chloe. Or, I loved the idea of you. I kept waiting for the woman I married to emerge from behind this performance of wealth and status. I kept waiting for her to show the kindness and empathy I told myself was hidden underneath. But I was wrong." His voice hardened again. "The performance is all there is. The foundation is faulty. The structure is hollow." The words hung in the air, an architectural epitaph for their marriage. He had not raised his voice. He had not used a single curse word. But he had utterly and completely dismantled her, using nothing but the truth as his wrecking ball. The fragile shell of Chloe's composure finally shattered. The arrogance, the confidence, the lifetime of entitlement, it all crumbled away, leaving behind a raw, terrified panic. The guests had mostly fled, leaving only a few morbidly curious onlookers and the central players in the drama. The grand room, once a stage for her triumph, was now a courtroom for her sentencing. She turned to Liam, her face streaked with tears that ruined her perfect makeup. The silver dress, which had seemed so powerful, now looked like a costume on a fallen actress. "Liam, please," she begged, her voice choked with sobs. She reached for his arm, but he took a step back, breaking the contact before it could be made. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. If I had known who she was, I never would have. I would have treated her like a queen." The words, meant to be a plea for forgiveness, were instead her final self-indictment. Liam looked at her, his expression now cold and empty of all pity. "And that, right there, is the entire problem, Chloe," he said, his voice flat. "Knowing shouldn't change how you treat a person. You don't get credit for being kind to the powerful. Kindness to the person you believe has nothing to offer, that is the measure of a person's character. And you failed the test." Richard and Beatrice, seeing their own world collapsing, rounded on their daughter. The familial unit of arrogance had fractured, and they were now turning on each other in a desperate act of self-preservation. "How could you be so stupid, Chloe?" Beatrice hissed, her face a venomous mask. "All this time, we thought he was the charity case. You had a queen in your house, and you treated her like a servant. You've ruined us." "I didn't know," Chloe shrieked back at them, her voice raw. "You hated her just as much as I did. You encouraged me." The ugly, frantic exchange was a pathetic postscript to their downfall. They were not sorry for their cruelty, only for their miscalculation. It was Eleanor who silenced them. She stepped forward, her presence commanding an immediate, respectful quiet. She looked at Chloe, not with triumph or anger, but with a deep, weary sadness that was far more damning. "Kindness is not a transaction, my dear," Eleanor said, her voice gentle but firm. "You do not dispense it only to those you believe can benefit you. You offer it freely because it is the right thing to do. The woman you threw out in the rain was a mother, a human being who deserved your compassion, regardless of the name on her bank account. That is the lesson you have failed to learn." Robert Harrison cleared his throat, bringing the proceedings to a clinical conclusion. "Ms. Davenport," he said, addressing Chloe with formal coldness, "you will have 24 hours to gather your personal belongings and vacate the premises. A list of what constitutes personal belongings will be provided. Essentially, your clothes and toiletries. Any attempt to remove assets belonging to the trust will be met with immediate legal action." Chloe stared at him, then back at Liam, her eyes wide with desperation. "Liam, our marriage. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I can change. I swear I can change." Liam slowly shook his head. The decision had been made long before this night. "There is nothing left to fix, Chloe," he said, and the finality in his voice was absolute. "The demolition is complete." He offered her nothing more. No comfort, no second chance. The love he had once felt had been eroded by 1,000 cuts, and the final blow had been the sight of his mother's scarf in a puddle. He turned his back on her, a simple, devastating gesture that signified the end of their life together. Beatrice and Richard, seeing that there was no salvaging the situation, made one last, desperate appeal not to Liam, but to Eleanor. "Mrs. Vance, Eleanor, surely there is some misunderstanding," Richard began, his tone now oily and obsequious. Eleanor simply looked at him, her expression unchanging, and said nothing. Her silence was more powerful than any rebuke. Defeated, Richard and Beatrice grabbed their coats and scurried out into the night, abandoning their daughter in the wreckage of her own making. Chloe was left standing alone in the center of the vast, empty room, surrounded by the debris of her perfect party, the wilting roses, the half-empty glasses, the lingering scent of failure. The house that had been her kingdom was now just a property she was being evicted from. The man she had tried to shape was a stranger who held all the power. She had been stripped of everything she valued, status, wealth, image, in the space of a few devastating minutes, and she was utterly, completely alone. 3 months later, the world was painted in the soft, promising light of early spring. The chill of that November night had receded, becoming a memory, a scar that marked a profound turning point. In a sun-drenched corner office overlooking the city, Liam Sterling and Eleanor Vance stood side by side, looking over a set of architectural plans spread across a large table. The office was the polar opposite of the house he had shared with Chloe. It was warm, functional, filled with books, models, and the vibrant energy of creation. They were not reviewing plans for a corporate skyscraper or a luxury condo. They were finalizing the design for the new downtown public library, a project Eleanor had decided to personally fund and which Liam was designing. It was a building of graceful lines and open spaces, designed to be a sanctuary of knowledge and community, accessible to all. "The atrium needs more natural light on the north side," Eleanor murmured, tapping a section of the blueprint with her finger. "We want it to feel welcoming, even on a cloudy day." "I was thinking a series of clerestory windows," Liam replied, sketching a quick modification. "It will draw the light down without creating glare on the reading areas." They worked in a seamless, comfortable rhythm, a mother and son united not just by blood, but by a shared passion and a deep, unspoken respect. The tension that had settled in Liam's shoulders during his marriage was gone. He looked younger, more relaxed. The quietness that Chloe had mistaken for weakness was now clearly identifiable as what it had always been, a deep, thoughtful strength. He had not felt the vindictive triumph he might have expected after that night. Instead, there was a somber sense of justice and an overwhelming feeling of liberation. He had not destroyed Chloe. He had simply held up a mirror and forced her to see her own reflection. The consequences were the natural result of her own actions. He had reclaimed not just his assets, but his integrity. He had filed for divorce the following week. The process was swift and clinical. Chloe had not contested it. Her fall from grace had been as swift and brutal as her family had feared. Stripped of the wealth and status she had used as a shield, the world she had curated turned its back on her. Her friends disappeared. Her parents, consumed by their own social and financial damage control, offered her little more than a small allowance and a litany of recriminations. The last Liam had heard, Chloe was living in a small, furnished apartment across town and working an entry-level job in retail. He did not know if the experience had humbled her, if she was capable of the genuine change she had promised in her moment of desperation. Her journey was her own. His focus was on building, not demolishing. He was building a library. He was rebuilding his life on a foundation of truth. He looked at his mother, who was now gazing out the window at the city skyline, a skyline she had helped shape. He thought of her quiet dignity in the face of his wife's cruelty, her unwavering support, her immense, hidden strength. He had spent years trying to bridge two worlds, when all along his world, the one she had built for him, was the only one that was real. "Thank you, Mom," he said softly. Eleanor turned, a gentle smile on her face. "For what, my dear?" "For everything," he said, his gesture encompassing the room, the plans, the city beyond. "For teaching me that a person's foundation isn't what they own, it's who they are." She reached out and squeezed his hand. "True worth is invisible to eyes that only look for glitter, Liam. It's measured in integrity, in kindness, and in the quiet strength to do the right thing, even when it's hard." "You did the right thing." He looked down at the plans for the library, a structure that would stand for a century, open to everyone, judging no one. It was a testament to his mother's values, and now to his own. The past was a demolished site, cleared and ready for a new, better structure. The future was an open blueprint, full of light and possibility. True worth is invisible to eyes that only look for glitter. It's measured in integrity, kindness, and quiet strength. Chloe's downfall was a direct result of her own choices, a form of poetic justice. What did you think of the consequences she faced? Were they justified or too harsh? We would love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspectives add so much to these stories. And if you found this story meaningful, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more narratives about the quiet battles that define us. Thank you for being here with us today.